Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Concussion Discussions series brought to you by Integrated Brain Centers. I am your host, Amy Zellmer from Faces of TBI. And today I am chatting with Dr. Shane Steadman from Integrated Brain Centers. And we're going to be talking all about brain fog after concussion. So welcome to the Concussion Discussions.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Great to be here again. This is awesome.
Yeah. So, brain fog, I think it's such an important subject. It's kind of an ambiguous topic. Like, what is brain fog? Because it can mean different things to different people. But what are some of the ways that you see brain fog present with your patients?
I think brain fog is such a great analogy because a lot of patients use it, and it, like you said, it is kind of vague and a lot of people don't know what it really means. Even kind of writing, some information down that I was doing, I was kind of going through all the different things that patients say, and they talk about brain fog, but then they talk about going through a fog or going through mud, or everything seems hazy, everything seems blurry, but their vision is good. I mean, even patients will go and have their eyes checked, and then they go, well, my eyes are fine, but everything just feels foggy and hazy and blurry, the brain fog is a really vague term, and there's not really even a medical condition for it. So it's great to even talk about this because I think a lot of people that watch this will go, that's what I'm experiencing. And so, if we can even talk, we'll talk about what people can do, to help with brain fog and all that. So maybe I can go into like what it is, you asked, and then we'll kind of help educate people on that. So brain fog is really kind of that inflammatory process. So when somebody has a brain injury, what happens is you get all this inflammation that goes inside the brain. And it's actually a really cool concept when you think about it, after the fact, of course. But, we have this thing called the blood-brain barrier. And what it does is it really protects us from the environment. It keeps, all the things that shouldn't be in our brain out. But whenever you have an injury, what happens is the blood-brain barrier, it opens up, right? And it allows for these different immune messengers or these signals to come across and say, hey, things are injured. So, it's like, how do you get the ambulance and the fire truck and the police car? How do you get those people inside the brain? Well, we got to trigger the response. We have to open up the gates, and then we have to allow everybody to come in. And so that's a great thing when you have a head injury. But the problem is that it can linger, and that inflammatory process can just sit there and sit there and sit there. And there's a lot of things that can contribute to it, and we can talk about those, but that is kind of really what this brain fog is. There's these great cells that they call microglia. And the microglia, they kind of help scavenge and they mop up the mess, and and their job is to clean things up, but you want them to kind of do their job and then go back. It's like you want the fire department to come in and then go back to the fire station. And when everybody's lingering around and creating havoc, so to speak, over time, then people just say, I just have this brain fog that won't go away. I just feel like there's heaviness and I'm going through, mud. This is what we hear all the time. So it's really, at the end of the day, to make it super simple, it's inflammation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, people describe it differently because they can't exactly pinpoint what it is, right? Like for me, it just kind of felt like this pressure in my head, and like I just felt fuzzy. And I often explain it when I speak to groups of just lay people who don't have brain injuries. I describe it like, imagine having the worst hangover of your life when you wake up, but it never goes away. And I mean, basically a hangover is inflammation, right? Yes. So, I mean, that was how I like to describe it to people who don't know how to relate to it.
Yeah. So I got a new patient last week, and that was his perception. He goes, it feels like I have a hangover every single day, all day. I'm like, okay, that's brain fog. Even the pressure. And I think it's been really interesting over the years. You really try to take what patients say, and you almost become an interpreter. So they don't know medicine, but they have feelings and symptoms and perceptions. So some have to like take their perception, translate that into another language that's more medical to try to be able to fix that. And so I've even heard that too, where people talk about having pressure. And I'm like, pressure? Like that doesn't really make sense. Like I get having pressure in your head, but some people talk about like pressure. or like I feel pressure on this side, or I feel pressure right there. And I'm like, that doesn't necessarily make sense, but it kind of does, but it kind of doesn't. And
Yeah.
they're trying to attach some kind of adjective or description to how
Yeah,
they feel.
mine was sort of like, it felt like there was just like pressure inside my head and it was trying to push my head open. Um, which is different from, I would also get like pressure headaches, but that was more like external
Yeah.
versus internal, if that makes sense.
Sure. And this is what makes it hard. This is why brain fog is such a great term.
It's like
Really
walking through mud, right?
is. We're really trying to figure out what are people experiencing, but this is so common ever since I started practice. And you can get brain fog from eating. I mean, there's a lot of times that, when I'm
Yeah.
lecturing, everybody goes to lunch and you can tell the people who are just fogged, because they had a big old burger with a Coke and some French fries. And
Yep.
then they try to come back to the lecture and you're like, yeah, nobody's home, you know? And that's how some of the brain injury people are too. It's like, you're like, nobody's home, so to speak, but it's just like their brains aren't working because they're just so inflamed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, for the vast majority of patients, it's going to boil down to inflammation. But what are some of the other possibilities aside from inflammation?
And probably another big one is blood flow, circulation. You got to have good circulation. And so, when we look at, people that don't have really good blood pressure, or have high blood pressure, so some of these things can cause brain fog. I would say definitely more on the low blood pressure side.
Mm-hmm.
So so if somebody's listening to this, well, how do I know if I have low blood pressure? Well, if you've never tested it, you'll know it when you go to stand up quickly. So if you can't stand up fast, and also you're like, oh, that was kind of weird. That could be low blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And actually maybe what is low blood pressure as well. A lot of people don't realize that if you're 105 over 60, I think that's low. The standard is
Mm-hmm.
120 over 80, but in the medical world, no one hardly ever talks about low blood pressure. They just go, hey, it looks awesome. Congratulations. And the person says, well, why do I have brain fog and I get dizzy when I stand up? Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I don't know. Here, try this medication, but that's blood pressure. So blood flow, I think, is a really big piece that you can sometimes see on MRIs when they talk about like microvascular changes on an MRI that can be indicative of poor blood flow. So really we look at like brain injuries and inflammation as one aspect of brain fog. We can look at blood flow as another form of brain fog. And then probably finally the other thing would be fuel, getting enough like glucose and
Mm-hmm.
carbohydrates and blood sugar. We don't want too much, but you can't have too little that your brain can't function.
Yeah.
And you see this too when people don't eat. So going back to lecturing, you can tell the people who are brain fogged right before lunch because they're kind of spacing out and they're looking all over the place. They can't focus. They can't
Yep.
concentrate. You're like, okay, it's time for a break. You go eat, and then all the people who eat poorly come back, and then they're fogged. So it's always fun to lecture between like 11 and 2
Yeah.
because you're half the crowd is out.
And that's actually something that I have only really in the last 6 to 12 months learned how to regulate for myself, my blood sugar, and how important protein is to my diet. I mean, I always thought about protein, but now I'm really conscious about protein. And like you said, that brain fog after lunch, like in theory, eating shouldn't make you feel foggy, right? It means you're eating the wrong foods for you. So I've really discovered I need high protein breakfast, high protein lunch, and then a protein snack before bedtime. And that has helped me regulate not just brain fog, but like my mood. Like I don't get that hangry dip in the mid morning where I must eat now.
Yeah, that's how I am too. I figured out that I have to have some good fat and good protein.
Yeah,
Like
fat and protein.
if I had fat and protein, I could actually have a little bit of carbs, and get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't have enough fat and protein, I get a little bit of carbs. I'll have a migraine, then I'm getting headachy and hangry and moody, and then I can't function or focus or concentrate. Yeah, so which it goes back into brain fog. So then I start getting brain fog, and you're trying to do it with patients. So every morning I'm like, okay, I gotta make sure I have good protein, good fat, some carbs, and that can sustain me so that, I'm not all weirded out by the time lunch rolls around. I mean, it's lunchtime right now, my time, and I feel like I'm going pretty strong, but I had a good breakfast.
Right. Right. And I think too, a lot of us forget to eat,
Mhm.
especially early in a brain injury, like just the actual forgetfulness of it. Um, and I know people that literally have to set an alarm to remember, oh, I got to eat something. So the struggle is real.
It really is. I mean, I think that's the struggle with brain injuries at the beginning, where you're like, okay, I need you to eat, I need you to eat. And people go, I just don't feel like it, or I don't have the energy or the brain function or the appetite, because definitely a lot of people lose their appetites too.
Yeah.
But then sometimes it just turns into a vicious cycle. And I think when we get people that come into the office, and that's a big complaint is brain fog, you go, well, okay, the brain injury probably started the brain fog, but you're not eating, which is perpetuating the brain fog.
Mhm.
And then it's not uncommon to see blood pressure go high or low with that, because especially with like chronic stress, you start seeing the blood pressure can go low. So now you got the inflammation and the food and the blood flow, and people are like, I can't focus, I can't work, I don't remember anything, I can't sleep, I'm fogged, I'm walking through mud, I feel like I need Windex on my eyes to clear it.
Yeah.
All these stories that we hear, and you're like, okay, time out. First we have to get you to eat, and that becomes a big piece, and then we can do some anti-inflammatories, and then we can work on the blood pressure and adrenals. And sometimes, not to say it's simple, but sometimes it can be just that simple, and people are like, oh my gosh, I feel great, and I'm like, yeah, because you finally were eating like I asked,
Yeah.
but we get
Yeah.
into cycles.
Yep. Yep. And change can be really hard. I mean, change is hard for anybody, but especially when you have a brain injury, because there's so much that's out of your control. It's hard to make changes because you want to stay in control. So I know that can be a challenge too. But talking about inflammation specifically, I hear in my group often how someone, they had their brain injury a while ago, they're feeling pretty good. And then they like bump into the doorway. They don't hit their head, they just kind of bump their
Mhm.
shoulder. And then they've got their brain fog back and they feel like their symptoms came back. And I mean, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that inflammation we didn't fix the inflammation, right? Like we might be feeling good, but we didn't address the inflammation. So now any little hit, jolt, disruption can cause symptoms and brain fog to flare back up.
Absolutely. So there's a concept called microglial priming. And so what that tells you is those cells that are in your brain are primed. They're like ready to go. They're like, I got everything is here. Like we're going to turn it all on in a moment's notice, which is a good thing unless you're trying to function.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's a good thing unless you bump yourself. And so these microglia, they're almost like a double-edged sword. They come in and they can mop up stuff, but they can also be very priming, and they can get the situation ready to go just in case. And so that's kind of what you see when people jostle themselves, bump their head, even just get bumped by a friend.
Mm-hmm.
You hear all these stories all the time. I remember somebody was telling me once that their kid just jumped on their back, and then all their symptoms came back.
Yeah.
They were so bummed and upset, and not mad at their kid, but mad at their kid. And you're like, that shouldn't be the case. That it should be
Right.
simple. But that tells you that you still have this kind of wicked undercurrent of inflammation that's going on. It still hasn't been addressed, and hasn't been identified. So that, I think for people that are experiencing that, you have to dig deeper and try to figure out where is that inflammation coming from. And that can be anywhere from diet, like what you are putting in your mouth, to, if you're drinking too much alcohol when you shouldn't, if you're not eating enough, even other physiological changes like menstrual cycles,
Mm-hmm.
thyroid function, liver function, detox, chemicals, mold in your house. These are all the other things that you kind of see out there when you start listening to other podcasts and practitioners. I could almost bet you that most of them would also talk about brain fog too, because if you do have mold in your house, that's going to create neuroinflammation. If you have abnormal hormone cycles, you can go through your monthly cycle with neuroinflammation. If you have hypothyroidism, that can lead to neuroinflammation. So you might be okay from the brain injury, but there's still like this other
Mm-hmm.
fire that's brewing underneath the surface that you need to identify. And this is kind of where like blood work comes in, and to find those practitioners that know how to look at a whole person and not just one piece of the puzzle. And that's what's going to get those patients better.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some of the things that you can help patients with, specifically for brain fog and inflammation?
You know, so I think the things that are in my toolbox, and so I'll say what's in my toolbox, and I think also this is good to say this is what you should look for in a practitioner as well. But what's in my toolbox is definitely understanding diet. I mean, that is, I always like to tell patients there's things you can control and there's things that you can't control. What you put in
Yep.
your mouth is something you can control.
Yep.
What the thyroid is doing may be out of your control, but diet and understanding diet, and not all diets are the same, and not one diet fits all. So just because you're doing a paleo diet for one person doesn't mean that's great for another. So kind of that's what's in my toolbox, is that understanding. I would say second is blood work. So that's one
Yeah.
of the things I love, because I love to go through and say, okay, what does your homocysteine look like? What is your cholesterol, CRP, all these markers to tell us, like, do you have inflammation? And then also we can look at thyroid, and we can look at liver, and we can look at gallbladder. I would say that's another great tool that I have to help people. And then from there, then putting together, there's certain supplements. I love using certain supplements to reduce inflammation. In our office, we're getting a lot into IV therapy for inflammation too. So we're looking at that, and we're even looking at some peptides, which is really kind of big out there as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing that we can talk more in detail about. But I would say those are kind of my categories of things that we're doing to help patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I appreciate what you said about there's things that we can control and things we can't control. And, getting enough sleep, we can kind of control, we can try to practice good hygiene. Sometimes our brains don't let us sleep. What we put in our mouth, what we eat, what we drink, I think something we haven't really touched on is hydration. I know that's really huge for me. I can tell when I haven't had enough water in throughout the day. Um, and yeah, having those things that we can have control over, taking our supplements, doing our exercises, I think that was a really good point that you just made. So I wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah.
um yeah so you know what so you went through your toolbox, and obviously no two patients are going to be exactly the same, but you like to try to run blood work on all your new patients to see where they're at with their blood work, and like, because what can blood work show us?
Oh my gosh, it's a lot. I tell patients blood work is kind of equivalent to this concept. If my car's not working, I take it into the mechanic, and they get this computer system that they plug into the car, and it gives them codes, and it reads it, and it tells them what's wrong, which is super awesome. So I even had to take one of my cars in for emissions over the last week, and with all the changes going on in our world, we couldn't get out of the car. There's a bunch of things we couldn't do, and so he just reached in, grabbed this cord, plugged the car into his computer, and it was like, "You're good." And so I'm like, "That's pretty awesome." That's the closest thing that we have from a human body that I know of, is to look at blood work. And blood work can give you an idea of blood sugar, electrolytes, your chemistry, gallbladder, iron, glucose, your immune system, inflammatory markers like your CRP, cholesterol, homocysteine, thyroid. When you do a comprehensive panel, it really tells a story, and you can say, okay, this system works, this one is not working. And then you try to figure out why. But if the thyroid isn't working, and let's say you're hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, then you can look at that and go, yeah, most people with low thyroid will say they have brain fog. Most people with low blood sugar also talk about brain fog. So
Mm-hmm.
these are probably two areas that we need to address, look into, and fix. So I love blood work. I think it's like cheap. I mean, you can do a blood chemistry panel anymore for really cheap. If your insurance doesn't cover it or doesn't cover full panel, and you can do almost about 3.5 pages of blood work for under $200,
Mm-hmm.
which for some people might sound like still like a lot, but there's no other test that will give you so much information for the price. And
Yeah.
That's probably one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can find so many things from blood work. And I hear stories all the time of how doctors have found random other things with their patient that the patient wasn't even aware of, simply by looking at blood work. So
Absolutely. I mean, because what if, you can run blood work and then look at the patient and go, you have an autoimmune condition, and the brain injury could have triggered the autoimmune condition, but now you're just left with it, so
yeah.
maybe you're still doing better from the brain injury, but the autoimmune condition is actually what's kicking your behind. And that's a big possibility too. And then I think sometimes what you see with patients is that once you're labeled with a TBI, it's TBI doctor, TBI doctor, TBI doctor. You're going from doctor to doctor, doctor, but you have this label. So everybody's thinking, well, I'll be the one to fix their brain. I'll be the one to fix their brain. When in fact, maybe their brain is actually doing okay, but they are now have an autoimmune condition, or maybe they now have an anemia, or they may now have, you can have any kind of trauma can set off something in your body that maybe you had a predisposition to. And it stinks to talk about that, but it's alive and well, whether it be a car accident, a head injury, a stroke, stress, an illness. Any of those things can set off something else that maybe you had a little brew, underneath, that was getting ready to manifest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was percolating. Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation, and I really think we just gave everybody a ton of information. So drop a comment below. Let us know if you have any questions, or, what golden nugget you learned from today's discussion. And as well, all of Dr. Steadman's information is below this video, but you can find him at integratedbraincenters.com and on Facebook and Instagram at Integrated Brain Centers. And additionally, if anyone, has any more questions for you, as far as interested in working with you, they can schedule a free consultation through your website, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can either go through the website or you can call the office. We always do free consultations to see if it's a good fit, and then we can move on from there. And, even to see, is blood work appropriate, or should we look at something else? So it kind of gives me an idea of a good place to start, because everybody is incredibly different.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any videos in this series. Like this video and head to Amazon to purchase Concussion Discussions.